and affect that academic piece, because you know one is truly connected to the other. And so not having that social aspect to motivate our students to want to actually work hard and close those gaps has been a real challenge. Our students are dealing with so many things, and so that socialization, that school culture that motivates students to want to come to school, you know, really kind of help to allow school to be a high priority on their list. And now you find it now, instead of school being first or second on their priority list, now schools has dropped down to fourth, fifth, and sixth on a lot of families' priority lists, because they're contending with so many things behind the scenes. And we really cannot overstate and overemphasize, and it's probably the one thing that I'm going to join Senator Hughes in tonight in discussing, that we cannot overlook that the issue of poverty in Philadelphia, and how over the course of years, how the pandemic has really exposed a lot of the inequities and injustices that have really been a candidate that's been kicked down the road and never been dealt with. And so now we're seeing it being played out with our children, where their needs are now so vast that we realize that we have never had the adequate resources to support them, not just them individually, but also embrace our families in a way so that they can, you know, be able to weather this storm. And so that's really the biggest thing we're seeing, is that social impact that is impacting the academic and widening the gaps that our students come to school with.
Mhm. Mrs. Smith, followed by Dr. Morrison. Please weigh in.
Yes, I definitely agree with the statements that you can clearly see as a result of COVID, the impact the lack of education funding has had on the district and the students overall. We could see it initially when there was this tough transition for the students to have access to technology, but you also see it with parents struggling to provide bandwidth, or students being able to access high-speed internet to be able to complete their assignments. Moreover, you see it in just the terms of resource gaps, where in other school districts there were already one-to-one Chromebooks, and the school district of Philadelphia were not able to provide students with those resources right away. And that inability contributes to the ongoing issues where the students were already struggling to catch up and are now falling further and further behind. So again, you can't underscore the necessity of having adequate education funding to ensure that students have access to resources prior to pandemics and prior to problems, arising, because this isn't going to be, hopefully it'll be the only COVID, but this won't be the only situation where students are required to engage in technology and utilize it to help and grow their development. We can stave off all the issues that come along with not having access if we adequately fund our schools.
Any thoughts, Dr. Morrison?
Yes, I obviously agree with everyone, but with what everyone has already said, I would add that one of the things that I think that this is really highlighted is the need for us to have a real structure around homeschool engagement, which is something that we haven't always, we've tried in many different ways, with schools and families, but it really has laid out how important that is, because there's been a lack of communication. There's been, miscommunication, lack of understanding of what the expectations are. But the other thing that the students have lost is a sense of safety in a lot of ways. Schools typically house a lot of really well regulated adults who have schedules and plans and systems that are running. And when you have adults who are fearful and scared and not sure of what's going to happen, you're undoubtedly going to have children who begin to absorb all of that energy. And so, what we've been seeing is children who are actually reflecting back to us what it is that they see coming from us, which is just a lack of understanding of what's going on. And when you match that with the lack of communication, everybody suffers all around: students, families, and communities, as well as schools. And I think those are the kind of things that we're going to have to look to using some funding for, is to really make sure that we increase communications and the ways that we communicate and invite families into the school, so that if anything like this ever happens again, we are prepared. We know where students are. We know how to find them. We know how to contact families instantaneously.
Thank you. Senator Hughes, would you like to weigh in on this question?
Well, look, all of the above, and my my hope is that as we go through this process, that and I kind of said this in my opening comments, we see it's always been in front of us, but really it's now really in front of us, right? It's really right there. Everybody on this Zoom is woke. They've seen it. They've been dealing with it, trying to manage it in whatever way. It's really right there in front of us now. The question really is going to be, I think, are we prepared to, again, going back to the resource conversation, marshal our strength, marshal our moral and political power, quite frankly, to get the resources necessary to create the academic environment that's needed for our children. It's going to, and changing our broader community's vision about education. All right, and how central is it to their day-to-day goings and comings? Okay, it's fundamental to progress. We know that. All right, but are we casting it out to our people in a fashion that they have to embrace it, and make sure that their lives are kind of constructed around it in many respects? All right. Because our kids are going to have to be in academic environments. Our children are going to have to be in academic environments after 2:30, after 3 o'clock. They're going to have to be in academic environments on the weekends. They're going to have to be in academic environments. Sorry, Jinaki. They're going to have to be in academic environments in the summer. They're going to have to be, it's going to be all school all the time. Now, you can make it fun, okay? You can make it enjoyable. You can make it an uplifting experience. And that's just going to be to catch up. I submit that as we create this process of catching up, that we kind of structure it in a way that it becomes the norm going forward. All right. Sometimes it's going to be in the big schoolhouse. Sometimes it's going to be in the pod that Sandra's going to talk about. All right. Sometimes it's going to be somewhere else. And I don't mean to tell you what Sandra's going to talk about, but all right. Some is going to be different places, but I think it's all about how do we create a structure going forward? And never, and I'm going to say this again and again and again, and I'm sorry to keep repeating this, we cannot have this conversation absent a resource dialogue. Mm-hmm. All right? No other community, and this is from being in Harrisburg for quite a few years, no other community in Pennsylvania negotiates against itself in terms of getting resources for the education of their children. Every other county, every other community across Pennsylvania, it's not about going back. It's not about taking a step back. And it's not about taking one pot of money from one group of kids to another pot of money to another group of kids in their own community. It's always about more and more and more. And you had that same attitude as well.
Thank you.
Can I add a couple of things?
Sure, Ken.
Move on. Just to follow up on the senator's comments, one of the things I think it's important to realize is even before the pandemic, our children were struggling. I mean, we had 2/3 of our children who were already behind in terms of their reading and their math. And so the pandemic has only made those gaps much, much bigger. And I think that's one important thing to remember. The other thing is that we've seen an increase in the levels of anxiety and trauma. You have children across this country who are committing suicide behind now the disconnection that they're feeling from school and from other anchors, because children love consistency. We know that already research is saying that for Black children, the learning loss is looking like at least 10 months. And that was last fall, coming out of last spring. So now we're going through almost another year of virtual learning. And so again, just think about how far our children are falling behind. Those things are going to take years to catch up on, no matter, even under the best of circumstances. If our children go back to school in person, it's going to take years for them to make up for this lost time. I would say the other thing for families is the stress and the trauma left by losing jobs. left by, loss of family members, health impacts of health, the behavioral health, the mental health supports that have to be embedded in our schools and in our community have increased. So I think those are just a few of the things that we're seeing coming out of this pandemic that are not going to go away even when we get the vaccine and all of that under control. So we need to get our minds around a 5 to 10 year plan, action plan to help recover this generation of or cohort of children, because the impacts are going to be long lasting.
Thank you. Dr. Cooper and Principal Gordon, these next two questions are for you, and you can tease them apart as you wish. We knew that in the spring there was little preparation for virtual school, but in the fall we knew that school would likely be virtual. Besides providing Chromebooks to most students, how have students been prepared for virtual learning? And then along the same lines, how have administrators, teachers, counselors, parents in the community been prepared to help students perform at their best during these times of virtual learning?
Ladies first.
Why, thank you, Richard. Well, I guess I have to start by saying again, I don't think the nation was prepared. I don't think the nation was prepared at all for what occurred with the closing of schools and children being home and the entire pandemic. So even trying to provide Chromebooks and actually get together some things for homes to be able to provide basic internet or high-speed internet has proven difficult. So I can pretty much speak to just seeing that there was a need, and also, and I often say this, and I have to continue saying it because sometimes people don't quite understand that administrators in Philadelphia, they have kept this district up and running and totally together. So where there was no PD, we provided PD. We provided PD on virtual learning. We rallied outside of Comcast to help to be a part of the solution to get internet access for children in need, because again, poverty should not be the barometer of whether you get an education or not. And we called on, folks that have money to pour back into the neighborhoods that pour into them. So we've spent a lot of time just, working with different organizations and really providing. We've had principals, they've had teachers who trained, we've had principals who've done training. CASA has been in the forefront of providing professional development for administrators to make certain that administrators can provide them for teachers. So Google Classrooms, we I need to really thank Philadelphia Alumnae. We had sorors that actually did a training, tweens, teens, and quarantines. And it really talked about the social emotional impact to make certain that we were in tune to children who may be isolated, feeling depressed, and issues of that for the very reason of looking at suicide. So a lot of things I think we did off the cuff, because there wasn't a handbook, because this is the first time we've been going through such things. Richard?
Thank you. So I agree with Dr. Cooper. Nobody was really prepared once we got into it. So, but a couple things that we kind of relied on. So in December of 2019, before the pandemic hit, one of our students was actually shot in Southwest Philadelphia and wound up actually having to remain home the remainder of the school year. And so what we did was we actually initiated, this is at Robeson High School, initiated a conversation and a trial by error, having a student kind of learn remotely, and just trying it out and see how it was going to work, just testing it out. And of course, when the pandemic hit, we all had to engage into that whole process. Over the summer, we collaborated and partnered with the University of Pennsylvania, particularly with the Work Ready program, which is the summer works program. And what we did was we engaged 9th and 10th graders, because again, if we're in a pandemic and the kids who usually have summer jobs couldn't work, we had to come up with some creative way to provide resources to help students out. And what we did was we created a work program where students actually attended school and actually received a stipend for participating in classes, and it allowed us an opportunity to kind of experiment with what online learning regarding teacher training, but also in terms of delivering instruction, how that would look for our school. And so a lot of lessons were actually learned as a result of that 6-week process that we experimented with over the summer. And what we were able to do was we were able to actually have those students that participated in those school, in that training program, actually provide assistance in the classroom, not only to their classmates, but also to their teachers in terms of, what worked, what didn't work, what were some of the technologies that teachers had to get up on that were actually engaging for a lot of our students. We also were able to hire a consultant to come in and actually talk about educational technology and actually what are some of the more effective ways to provide instruction for students, to engage them, so, and at the same time, allow teachers to get comfortable with the process of teaching, because the springtime was more, it was very clear by the school district. It talked about, really review. It was more review more than anything else. It wasn't necessarily, a full blast of instruction that was happening. Whereas the fall, it was, full speed ahead with actual instruction happening. And that was a transition for a lot of our teachers. And there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of crying, a lot of, frustration. And our teachers had to get comfortable with that process of transitioning from teaching in the classroom to teaching online, and, and having all their classes be like that with an undetermined amount of time. So, we had opportunities to transition and do that. I'm not exactly sure if that was something that was fortunate for all schools to be able to do that and transition as quickly as possible. And again, it goes back to the idea about resources, what's available, and the partnerships that are out there. Are there resources and individuals that are out there advertising and sharing what their resources are to be able to support schools in a way to make it all effective. So, and just one last thing, again, just to kind of touch back on this and on the last conversation too. And I think Mrs. Glenn really pointed out that the struggles were happening all this time, and it just kind of got worse. And one of the things that has always been pointed out, and nobody has really wanted to address the issue, is that the Philadelphia School District in particular is basically a caste system. It is a caste system of haves and have-nots, where you see that even through the high school selection process, that certain schools are able to select certain schools and certain certain programs, and then they're able to actually have certain alumni that raises money for them, which is money outside of the regular funding source, to allow them the opportunity to operate in a way that supports their students, with some of the things that are missing. Where the more, the poorer schools, and Senator Hughes talked about Overbrook High School, for example, where that's not an opportunity, where you had a school that was once sprawling with 3,000 kids, now down to 600. And so we have to be able to address that issue as to why that funding inequity is happening, because unfortunately it's only making matters worse. And we continue to kick the can down the road while individuals are allowed to be able to create environments that are special for their children, and upkeep the building, where you have schools like Overbrook and schools like Robeson and other schools that are poorer schools where the buildings are literally falling apart around principals, and we're not addressing that issue. And so we're not able to create those environments to be able to, to deal with emergencies like a pandemic, or just the day-to-day emergencies that happen with our schools. So I just want to kind of, share that.
Thank you, Principal Gordon. Mrs. Coleman and Dr. Morrison, this question is for you, and then we will pivot and take a question from the audience. And I want to remind our audience members to place their questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of their screen. Mrs. Coleman and Dr. Morrison, how are children who have special needs, learning differences, etc., being supported?
Okay. I'll start by saying that although the school district is a comprehensive school district, each school has its own culture. And while we're speaking about inequities, every school does not have the same staff across the board. For instance, I'm part of the STEP program, which is a pilot initiative by the mayor and city of Philadelphia. It stands for Support Team and Education Partnership. And it's placed over 50 social workers across the city of Philadelphia, but we all know that there are more schools in the city than 50 schools. So some schools have social workers in them. All schools have counselors in them. And depending on the climate liaisons and other team members that make up the staff in the school, depends on what can be offered in that particular school. Specifically in regard to addressing social and emotional development, one of the key players is always the teacher, right? Teachers are trained on social emotional curriculum, but they do rely on mental health experts and other behavioral health experts to support them in training the teachers and supporting the teachers and providing social emotional development. Oftentimes that gets in the way, so to speak, of teachers being able to focus on the academic aspect of teaching their children, which is what they come to work for. And so schools have to be really creative in how they point the various members in their school to support children with social emotional development, especially children who already have challenges that before COVID came. They have challenges that we needed to help them deal with while they acclimate to learning like an average child. There are instances where social emotional learning sessions are incorporated throughout the day. And when you do have additional mental health supports, there are therapeutic interventions that come into play and things of that nature. And depending on tiers that the children fall in based on their needs, then there needs to be individualized planning to support those specific children while we're also consulting with the teachers so that they can balance teaching the children and helping them manage their social emotional compositions.
Thank you. Dr. Morrison, you want to weigh in on this question?
Yes, so since we tackled the social emotional aspect, I'll kind of lean on the academic piece, if that's okay. And as a school, I'm a school psychologist, and one of the things that I work with, one of my jobs directly is to work with families and children and teachers who are receiving special ed services. And so there's a continuum when you ask that question, there's just a continuum of students who have what we might call high incidence disabilities or low incidence disabilities. So we're talking about like autistic support programming versus learning support programming. And what it really boils down to is if those teachers have enough training, as Principal Gordon pointed out and was talked about earlier, training to actually provide the instruction is going to impact how the students receive instruction. Most schools at this point, I think, have online resources that students can use independently. But when you're talking about that direct instruction, we don't have enough resources, right? And so again, that homeschool connection becomes really important to make sure that students are actually able to log in, because there's an assumption about, because we have digital natives, all the children have grown up with cell phones, but they don't always have the technology skills to access what they need to access in the Google Classroom, or identify the resources, or figure out even how to get to it. We have for in the beginning of the school year, we had teachers who couldn't get on Zoom and mute themselves, right? And so we know that if the teacher is not able to get on Zoom and mute themselves, that we're really looking at what is that going to look like in the classroom. And what it is going to look like is a lot of missed assignments, a lot of missed time that's one-on-one or small group instruction, and helping teachers really figure out how to manage that. What I see is that our students are really in need of the technology skills in order to actually access the services. And there are some things that just can't happen online that you can do in person. So our children who do need special education services are in a lot of ways at a disadvantage, just because the virtual environment can be very limiting.
Thank you. Thank you. We're gonna take a question from the Q&A box. Dana, do you have the question available?
Tiffany, we've received quite a few questions from the audience. While we know we can't ask them all, here's one that we'd like to add to the conversation this evening. We would like to ask the panel about their thoughts on standardized testing, like the PSSA during a pandemic. Should these tests be canceled, What can we do to advocate for canceling them?
Let's start with Mrs. Glenn. Sandra Dungee Glenn, you were with the School Reform Commission, but you are also right now on the Pennsylvania State Board of Education. Can you speak to us? Has there been any conversation? What are folks' thoughts about standardized testing?
So there hasn't been any decision on it as far as we've been told as board members this year, but I'll speak as a board member and as a Philadelphia citizen, and that I think to me, it doesn't make much sense. What are you measuring? If we were to, it would be unfair to, I think, have the school districts implement the standardized test this year. One, because it's supposed to measure what you've learned in a particular period of time over a school year. But we know that many of our children have not had access to a full 10 months, 5 months, 8 months of schooling. The virtual learning, we know that there may be somewhere between 30 and 50% of our children who aren't showing up consistently for virtual classes. We know there are all kinds of challenges with having access to the technology. So it would not be a fair measure. I don't think it would serve the schools well. I don't think it would serve the students well. And it feels like it's blaming the victim, because it's the child who will carry the stigma of the results of the test, and in some cases the schools. So I don't think it would serve the system well. I don't think it serves our students well. The challenge is, though, it does leave a question, though, well, how should we be looking at what children's needs are? Because the real purpose of an assessment should be to point out what's missing. Where are the children? What skills do they need? Where are they academically? And then how do you help them move forward? So there is a need for some kinds of assessments, but I would think it would be more serve our purposes better if they were delivered at the school level and was really based on individually measuring a child's academic progress. The standardized test, I don't think would serve much purpose for us in this environment.
Because the question came from the audience, do we have another panelist that would like to speak to this issue? 2 minutes, or we can move on to another question.
I would. I think the standardized test should be, that's a no-brainer. So if there's anybody out there who really is trying to conduct standardized testing, right now we have a total health crisis, and we pretty much, the teachers know where their children are. They are gathering informal data every day via virtually. It's not the same thing as if they were in school and they could do it, but data is being gathered. And what happens is children are already turned off with the whole, like they are sitting in front of a computer for an inordinate amount of time. And the whole thing is, if you ask me, would I rather have a healthy child or a child that did a standardized test? For me, if I was a parent, I would opt out of it, because there's no real barometer of, if they do poorly, what does that mean for the teacher? Does it mean that the teacher really didn't instruct them? What does that mean for the principal? When you're talking about high stakes testing, you could say what you want about standardized tests. People take it it's a very important assessment. And right now we are in a health crisis. I think we should really work on the school-wide and district-wide tests to assess children, but I don't necessarily know if a standardized test is the answer for anything. And I know right now we are, CAS is working with our joint council, our Teamsters Joint Council President, Billy Hamilton, to address a letter to our legislative team to make certain that we have our issue. We have a letter out there that says we are totally against the standardized testing until this pandemic crisis is over.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Parent and caregiver engagement. This has been an eye-opening time for all of us, perhaps especially for parents who have shared how stressed they are over virtual schooling while working from home and managing multiple children in multiple grades in different schools. On a side note, many of them have expressed how much it increased their awareness and made them appreciate the work that teachers and school administrators do. What support or consideration is given or can be given to families when a parent, due to possible literacy or comprehension, concerns, is unable to support the learner at home? So oftentimes our young people were in school and they were receiving all of their primary instruction from school and they weren't receiving any help at home. Now we have young people who are at home receiving learning through a computer, but they really don't have the additional hours or the support to follow the original portion of instruction. So what considerations are being made for those young people? What assistance is out there? Mrs. Bright, Dr. Morrison, Principal Cooper. 2 minutes, please.
Well, one is Read to Succeed. We're here, and that's part of why we are here, why Senator Hughes 10 years ago did a call to action for this to be available. So you have Read to Succeed. You have other community-based programs that are here. You also have the child's teacher. And oftentimes parents forget to communicate with their child's teacher. If you don't get the response that you want, then you go to the next level, which is the principal. But oftentimes, a lot of teachers are left in the dark because they don't know, and information is withheld to them. But there are resources available for families, and I will share those with you, I guess, through the chat or the Q&A, so that can be shared with our attendees if they are experiencing that. But there are tons of resources. You have Read by Fourth, who has tons of resources that are available in addition to free tutoring and support.
One of the things that I refer parents to all the time is that the multi-tiered systems of support that are something that is supposed to be happening in schools. And so at each tier, there are supports that are specific to what is going on at that particular level. So at tier 1, the teacher should be aware of what is available to the students in the school. Like I mentioned earlier, there are plenty of online resources. I think what does become an issue is if a parent does have a literacy issue, then we have to really figure out how to make contact and connect with that family, because where we're maybe sending emails with attachments and all of these things at home, we may need to figure out how to get that parent online virtually so that we can actually have a conversation with them and maybe even guide them through how to connect to certain services, because that is something that they may not be able to access just from a text message. I'll do, however, really push the idea of tiered intervention for children, right, and their families that can be linked up with the supports that they need, particularly around mental health services. There's a new initiative in the district where each school and area has social services supports or mental health supports that are assigned to that particular school. A lot of schools have a social worker, as was mentioned early on. And I think really having regular contact with parents, which I know can be really difficult for teachers to do given the environment that we're in, but even just checking in with students and saying, hey, you're on right now. Can we go into a breakout room and bring your parent into the room if somebody is home or whoever you're with? But really going above and beyond to make sure that we're making some type of verbal contact with the parent is extremely important. And making sure parents have numbers that they know who to call and when to call is also really important.
You mentioned there are various methods and ways to communicate with parents. Can someone else elaborate on additional ways or apps or programs that are being used to communicate with parents? And then the second part of that question is, are home visits being conducted, and who's collecting the data on these home visits, and what are the effectiveness of them?
I would like to speak to that. It's a tricky situation with home visits because, again, we are in a pandemic, and being a social worker, we have no problem going anywhere at any time to meet a family where they are. And there have been certain time periods where we have been pulled out of the field because of the increase in numbers of COVID exposure. So it gets very challenging with connecting with families, but we have to be really creative. Like Dr. Morrison mentioned, there are various ways of contacting families verbally. Teachers are the first point of contact, and they will make attempts. And if they don't, they do rely on the support people in their school to make outward attempts to engage families. And it does include going out to homes, yes. It also includes just relying on the relationships that existed before COVID hit. There have been many close relationships that schools have had with families, and sometimes we've relied on other families to help us connect with some families that are unreachable. We have to try anything and everything. Over the summertime, the school district made a huge effort to call every single family that is a student of the Philadelphia School District, and it happened. And I think that there are very small miracles that are happening in the school district that aren't necessarily publicized, where we are trying to connect with each and every family. But it just is a day-by-day situation, and the team constantly comes back together to figure out who has a connection with this particular family. And again, sometimes we will enter into classrooms and connect with one child who lives next door to another family. The key is just to be committed to that outreach. And in terms of families being engaged who might be behind in terms of technology and things of that nature, sometimes we're quick to say we can text them or use technology to reach them, but if they are not at the level where they're even able to access technology or understand some of the things to go on, home visits and face-to-face contact is pretty much key to be able to help engage them and bring them through the steps that we can connect them to the resources that are available. And some of that is just specifically hand-holding, but again, the challenge is because of COVID, we have to stop, go, and that's causing further gaps that, you know, we have to continue to brainstorm around.
And I also think that, you know, for the school district, they have Google Voice. And so parents have access to be able to call or text teachers. Also for children who are now some daycare centers and learning pods and all those things, they have picked up, you know, children to provide virtual learning opportunities for them as well. And so you now see daycare workers, you know, speaking to the regular teachers to find out, well, what's needed. I'm noticing that they're, you know, clocking off when they shouldn't be clocking off. So it's just a lot. There are parent town halls. So there are, you know, staff members who are really working and talking to parents, so parents can get a crash course in how to support their children at home. The bottom line is it just takes flexibility and a willingness to engage our parent partners.
And Tiffany, if I can pick up on that, and just the last point that was made.
And I was getting ready to call on you. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Tiff. I was part of a group, or am part of a group, Philadelphia Community Stakeholders, that piloted a community pod last fall. And thanks to support from our elected officials, Senator Hughes and Haywood and Street and Senator Williams, helped us connect, first of all, with families to learn what their needs were. We were able to connect with about 4,300 families through virtual town halls. And out of that, a group of Black educators came together from the school district, the charter community, the archdiocese, folks who were just advocates for education. And we were able to put together a model for a pilot that we did at Bible Way Baptist Church for about 10 weeks. And we were able to serve 39 children at a site. And the children were able to come all day, Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And Jinaki Bright was one of our wonderful supports for that program. We had instructors that we hired, and we gave professional development to. We had a site director, and we had one staff person who worked full-time with parents. And that was critical because parents were then able to have somebody to talk to about their problems, their issues, their concerns. But what it was able to do was provide a consistent place for children to show up every day, to get support for their virtual learning, number one, but also we were able to offer supplemental lessons to help them with their learning gaps. And we had a parent resource center so parents could go online for information. And the fourth thing that was critical is we had a behavioral health partner. We had a behavioral health specialist that came in for a couple of hours every day to do observation with our children and also to offer support to the instructors. We were not trying to replace the classroom teachers, but the instructors were able to develop relationships with the classroom teachers, and we found that it helped to have the children showing up at the pod because they were more consistent in connecting with their classroom instruction. And so it made a difference for the child. They could get some opportunity to socialize in a controlled way. We had some very specific COVID-19 protocols, but it also supported the parents. And we think we had very good and positive feedback from the schools as well. Our children came from about 15 different schools. So it was a pilot, and now we are having conversations with the school district and with the city about having that model as part of the access centers and some of the work that the school district may be doing over the summer. So I think at the end of the day, the bottom line is we're going to have to find ways for the community to support our schools and our families. The school can't do it by themselves, families can't do it by themselves, but we have churches, we have other organizations that can help to step into that gap. And so that's what we wanted to show with our model, that there are ways for the community to come alongside and support this. So we're hoping we'll be able to continue that pilot, that program with the Learning Pod and Resource Center and replicate it.
And as soon as you started speaking about the Learning Pod, the Q&A box lit up. And for clarity, the Learning Pod is closed. The pilot for the pod is closed at this particular time, and there are no young people who their families cannot register to attend. Can you explain the difference?
Tiffany, it's Senator.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, and you? Okay. So let me, I mean, that's it. Sandra, you're so brilliant because you just like segged right into me, okay? Didn't even know it. So think about it like this, folks. Step back a minute, maybe close your eyes, imagine it. Jinaki, I think I'm sounding like a third grade teacher, all right? So close your eyes a little bit. Is February, March, April, May. Everybody's got the vaccine. Everybody's all vaccinated up. We can now start coming out, right? And being in a place. And by this time, Richard Gordon and Robin Cooper, all the schools are cleaned up of the lead, and they're cleaned up of the asbestos, and all of the trash is out of it, and they're all fixed up. And it's summertime, and we've got this mind thing set that there's education all over the place. All right? And you can go to a pod, you can go to to get some extra help in the evenings, or maybe Richard, the school maybe have to shut down, like 6 o'clock or something like that, right when you putting in that second shift work, all right? But there's the church is open, and you can hit that on the weekend or something like that. What am I saying? We need to hire the social workers, Lisa, okay? Because really, sometimes our parents are so overwhelmed with life, right? That they need help to help deal with life, okay? And so that's a job for somebody, okay? That's a social worker, all right? So start visioning this in your mind. And Richard and Robin, as principals, they love to have this because that's extensions of them. In many respects, that's their staff support. In many respects, to go out and help. You got a family, there's some stuff going on in that family. We got to get some extra help going on over there. But that's a staff. So what am I saying? Create the vision in our minds of what we want and know we want for our children and what an academic reality looks like. Okay? First thing is we got to vision it. Okay? And see, because we all know what works. We all know what doesn't work. And we all know the supports necessary to make it work. Just create that in our mind, and let's be about going out and getting it and setting it up. Sandra and them set up that pod because the whole group of expert educators came together and said, this is what we need. We set up Read to Succeed on the basic notion that when the child leaves, every child should be on grade level reading by third grade. Why are we accepting this? So we brought a bunch of folks together who knew how to educate. And for 10 years, we've been taking at the beginning of September, our children are 3 months ahead when they hit back in school. Simple notion. We created the vision of what we wanted to achieve, and then we went about it. And that's all I'm saying. And I'm not trying to hijack the conversation. What I'm trying to move from the day-to-day implementation stuff and how do I navigate it, okay? And we're going to have to do that for the next couple of months till everybody get all dosed up and vaccinated up. That's right, Penny Nixon. I said that in that last session, dosed up, okay? All right? Everybody get dosed up, vaccine up so we can go out into the world. But while we're doing that, we're implementing the vision that we know is necessary. And this works whether you're in a traditional public school or a charter school or a parochial school or private school or anything like that. It's all doable. Let's create the vision first and let's go about making it happen.
Thank you, Senator.
I'm sorry.
Heather, it's okay. I have 150 questions here. I'm not sure if anybody wants to see my stack, and the Q&A box is filled. Heather, do we have another question from the audience at this time? Heather, are you there?
Yes. This has been a great discussion, and we have numerous questions. One of the questions is, what should we do as community and religious organizations to hold our Philadelphia school superintendent, mayor, politicians accountable for the disparities during COVID and before, as well as how can we close the gap and actually advocate for them through our state and local leaders?
Tomea, would you like to take that question?
Sure. Obviously, the best way to get involved is to speak out and just be vocal about what it is that you and your family and your students need. We've spoken a bit about the education funding gaps. We know that in Philadelphia is one of the most inequitably and inadequately funded school districts in the state. And without your voices talking to legislators, not just the legislators in Philadelphia, but legislators in city council, legislators in the state, legislators like the governor, who are actually making these decisions as to how to fund education, speak out. And not just you, they hear from parents sometimes, they hear from community members sometimes, but are they listening to the business leaders? Are they speaking, are you, using your voices, as a sorority members? Are you using your voices in clergy? Are you using your voices together collectively with the chambers of commerce that you're engaged in? Collectively, being representative across all, all of not just you and not just your community, but across all the people who have voices that matter, that are non-traditional voices, in addition to parents and school leaders and teachers. If you're working together collectively to write letters to legislators, go visiting offices, or in COVID times, scheduling virtual meetings, but being very clear that you'll no longer settle for this inequity. But again, not just saying it, but getting groups of people to say it, getting groups of people to act on it, and being persistent in the message. So not just doing it once or twice, but budgets are passed in late May and early June. So consistently working together to do that. And of course, if you want an advocacy home, reach out to PCCY where we are, and we are happy to coordinate those visits with you. We'll work with you and prepare you for those legislative meetings so that you are not nervous, but you go in there with this comprehensive message so that your voice is heard.
May I?
Yes, Principal Gordon, go ahead.
Thank you. So, because the question was, so I don't want the question to be directed towards holding accountable just one person. We have to hold accountable a system that's in place, because that is problematic. And it goes back to the comment that Senator Hughes made before about having a vision and going out and setting it up. But then at the same time, because the school district is so inadequately funded, that we are hamstrung to what really the city wants to do and what the state wants to do. And it provides limitations, particularly to principals who are trying to be innovative. You know, so because there are principals that are out there who are focused on trying to do what's best for kids and aren't necessarily always focused on, you know, making sure that these standardized high stakes tests are the end all be all. Because I've seen principals, and again, Robin, please forgive me, Dr. Cooper, please forgive me, but you know, I've seen principals, you know, attacked for paying more attention to what's best for their kids versus what's going on with regards to standardized testing, and actually removed from the buildings. So we are part of the system, and we are hamstrung of having that fight with our own bosses. And where we need the community support and our legislative support is be able to have these innovative conversations about how we're going to fundamentally change how our kids are being served in this system that is inadequate. And like I said before, is a caste system. It is problematic because it doesn't allow for the opportunity for innovation to happen. Whereas that principals are being hamstrung to be very traditional, and the same things that we're talking about and doing today are the same things we've been doing 30 and 40 years ago. And I bet you, if you actually take a data timeline, taking a look, the same schools that have been achieving 30 years ago are achieving, and the same schools that have been struggling 30 and 40 years ago are the same schools and communities that are still still struggling to this day. So until we actually have this conversation about how we're going to influence the system, how individuals in the systems are really focused on their particular agenda, but that agenda has nothing to do with kids.
So I thank you. I also want to address just that bit. I think that just as Richard said, it's only so much that administrators can do because we are a part of that system. But you know, you can't wait for people to tell you what you need for your children. You know what your children need. And when it comes time for education, we sit back and we allow other people to tell us what we know is best for our children. So we need to make certain that we are pushing legislators, the superintendent, school districts, everybody to do what we believe is in the best interest of our children. We know that there are inequities. You know, when I did research, there almost in every major city, there is a diversity, equity, and inclusion person allotted. In fact, in some cities, there is a diversity person, an equity person, and an inclusion person. There is monies allotted. So you cannot, like in the city of Philadelphia, as large as we are, we're using the catchphrase equity. But if we're really not talking in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, our children are always going to be left out. We have to stand up, talk to the politicians, talk to the legislators, but we have to make certain that communities and organizations such as the ones on this call are holding these entities accountable, because it's going to take all of us to change this system.
Could I add something?
Sure, go ahead.
So I would like to also add that I think it's really, I know that it's really important for us to engage young people in this process of advocacy, activism, and organizing around issues that are important to them in their schools. And they have voices, and they are our next wave of voters, and they need to be aware of the issues. And part of the work that my nonprofit organization does is support young people in actually practicing advocacy, activism, and organizing, reaching out to state legislators. But we need our young people to also understand what it means so that they can carry the torch as part of the work. That's the intergenerational connection that we need to build in order to make sure that everybody in the city who's impacted by these things, that it doesn't just stop with us, with this generation, but that it's actually able to be passed down the line, and understanding what is necessary and what that work actually looks like. And that's something that we can start doing in high schools and in middle schools around civic education and public and political education, which is something that a lot of our schools are not doing, and something that our students need.
Okay, I'm going to, we have a dozen questions in the Q&A, and they're really good questions. And we have some already prepared, thought out questions that people had already submitted. What I'm going to ask is for the panelists each to think about an action step. What is next? The one thing from your point of view that parents, students, educators, whoever needs to do. So just one step. Think of that. And then we're going to go to a question inside of the Q&A. Heather, are you available?
Yes, Tiffany.
Okay.
We have another great. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So that we were asked, what is it that we can do to support scholars living with autism, intellectual disabilities, and with complex and multiple disabilities? Many parents get support from school and are not receiving them due to virtual learning because many scholars cannot handle the virtual aspect. How are those parents and students being supported in this dilemma, in this pandemic?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Some of our scholars have not received any instruction since March 2020 because of their diagnosis. And it's real, and parents are struggling. They can't go to work because they need to be home, or they need to be the teacher. And so this sounds like a question that we really don't have an answer for. We really have a population of hidden students who are at home. What can be done about that?
So I'm gonna hit it from two perspectives, Sandra. I mean Sandra, I call Sandra, but Tiffany, I'm gonna hit it from two perspectives. First of all, if we have a resource network available, we need to disperse that so that folks know exactly where they can go to try to get that help. You know, so that's one thing. From a policy perspective, School District of Philadelphia has just received or is about to receive $565 million of one-time funding. This is the pot of money coming from the $908 billion that was passed just before you know who left the White House. Okay, out of that $908 billion, portion of that money went to Pennsylvania. The school district is getting $565 million of it. It's for one-time funding. I believe the district, Dr. Height and his crew have kind of started to formulate how they want those dollars to be spent. I'm guessing that there may be a possibility that some of those dollars can be spent to deal with this particular cohort. All right, you know, these children that may have a little extra challenges going on. And obviously implementing that is always a huge problem in the time of the pandemic, in the time of COVID, right? You know, always a huge problem. But, you know, if we advocate for that kind of thing or try to get some information, find out what the deal is, then maybe as we get vaccinated up, dosed up, and things start to open up a little bit more, maybe then we may be able to access some of our children and their families to these resources in real time. All right. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Thank you. Another question in the chat, and I realize that it is 8:30, so we'll be wrapping up soon. I saw a mother at a corner store running her business, and her son was in class while she was at work. I never understood the depths of how the pandemic had really changed lives. My question is for Ms. Sandra Dungee Glenn. I love the fact that you shed light on how families have been impacted during COVID. Can you shed light on the parents that have to take their children to work with them outside the home and how they can be efficient with running their business while the kids are trying to learn? Thank you kindly.
I will come back to what I mentioned about the learning pod. I don't think there is a way for parents to effectively and consistently over a period of time live in that space where they're trying to go to work and they're trying to educate their children. I think that is unsustainable, even though many parents have been forced in that situation. And going back to what the senator's point is, we have to start advocating for what we know is right and needed and stop settling for what we've been given. I'm saying that to say the pilot that we did around the learning pod, we need to be planning for, and Senator, looking to you as we talk about funding, we need to be planning for we need to be planning for community-centered supports for education. We have to. I don't know another way. You know, I'm not the brightest bulb in the pack necessarily, but I don't know how to think about this, because there is no way between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. schools are going to be able to deliver to our children all the learning they need to get caught up and then move forward, because we were struggling to do that before. Our schools are underfunded by $10,000, $10,500 per child per year. That's the gap. That's why we are having this conversation, because our schools are inadequately funded, number one. So we're starting from a poor base. We have to move a conversation that says, in addition to whatever's going on in school, we have to create out of school time that is across our community, in churches, in daycare, childcare centers, using school buildings after school. It is essential. And we know how to do it. We know how much it will cost to do it. We have people who can be brought to it, whether it's college students, part-time teachers. We have the networks. We need to demand the resources. And I don't know another way. So we have to require and get our minds around having a community-based support and web of support for our schools and our families. That's what it's going to take. And we are going to have to bully, holler, push to get it paid for at the federal level, at the state level, at the city level. That's what we have to do. And it is a fight. There are many people who don't believe our children are worth it. And we have to also be honest about that. They don't believe Black children and brown children are worth the investment. We have to demand that they are. And even before we win that fight, we have to believe they are. And then we have to use all of those spaces and places, barbershops, beauty salons, everywhere, to be educating our children. And if we don't take it on like that kind of mission, we'll be having this conversation 5 years from now. It is a mission, it's a battle, it's a fight, and we've got to get it.
Sandra's absolutely right. And Sandra, don't try to imagine any other way. There is no other way. That's the only way. It really is. Okay. And Sandra's not throwing away a point because it's easy to say when you say when she made the statement about other folks don't believe our children can learn. I was deposed in the school funding lawsuit. All right, major lawsuit that the state Supreme Court is going to be deciding at some point. All right, that's why we can't let them change the way we elect the state Supreme Court. But that's a whole nother conversation. But it's an important one. All right. And I was deposed, and because I believe that the court has to take it over and get the money where it's supposed to get to. The lawyers representing I'm not going to be political, I'm just going to be factual, representing the Republicans basically said, and not even basically said, well, you know, the leaders in the Republican Party don't believe that Black children can learn. So why should we just give them money because they don't think that our children can learn? Now, that ain't a political statement. Mm-hmm. That is a deposed statement in a landmark lawsuit that will have a national impact if it goes the right way. So she ain't just making it up. Mm-hmm. That's what we're fighting against. And all I would say, Sandra, and to everybody, it's the government's responsibility, but it's the corporate and philanthropic responsibility as well. They can't escape. They can't escape. They can't escape helping out. They can't.
Yes. Senator Hughes, if I can just add to your point also, I'm a principal because Dr. Penny Nixon plucked me out of a school I wasn't even asking for a school. She just saw something in me and made me a principal. And I'm always indebted to her for my position where I'm at today. But when she asked me to be a principal in the school district of Philadelphia, I became embroiled in the conversation around what's called Promise Academies. Dr. Ackerman, God rest her soul, not saying that she was perfect. I'm not even, but what I'm going to say is her fight to provide equity programming for communities that were the most struggling communities in Philadelphia also met with heat and a lot of blowback and a lot of animus that came towards her way and Dr. Nixon's way, just to make things equal, and that's inside of Philadelphia. So just as we are talking about the fights that, again, that Ms. Glenn is talking about and Senator Hughes is talking about, that fight is also internal here locally also, where there's entities that don't want to see that equity being dealt with Black and brown children in the city of Philadelphia. They are amongst us. They sit next to us. I'm telling you, it is there. And so it is blatantly obvious that this is a fight that we have to take on, and that we have to make sure that we get support, not just amongst the educators, but also we really need the community to understand the depths of what people will do to make sure that, that the status quo remains in place.
Okay. I heard action steps, learning pods, out of school time, community based is a specific action step. Reimagining what is possible is an action step. Speaking up is an action step. Jinaki, tell me your action step. Tomea, tell me your action step. And I'm trying to move fast because there's lots of questions. I know folks have a lot to do and they don't want to sit on Zoom all night. So I'm trying to get as much in, but it sounds like we need to actually continue this conversation so that we can collectively figure out what to do together. But Jinaki, I'll let you go. Tell me what your action step you think, what's the next step? What action step?
I'm going to be brief, Tiff, but I'm going to take on a phrase that another conversation that you and I had and kind of stuck with my heart. We tend to always say it could be worse. And you said, like we need to stop that, because when we say it could be worse, we're settling for what is.
I got that from Marvetta Coleman.
Oh, all right. But it should be better, and it can be better. So how do we get to better? And taking from Senator Hughes, my third grade theory, he kind of took away what I was going to do. But now that you imagine it, put it down on paper. Figure out what it is that you not just want, but what you need. And I'm sure with that, in your school systems, in your community, there are probably 1,000 other people who have those same ideas and want and need those same things. Come together. If you need help with that, please contact me. Please contact the people on the panel, because we're here to help. So let's come together so now we can narrow down what that we need for our schools. Not that it has to happen, but this is what we need and this is what we're demanding.
Tomea, Tawanna, and then I think we're going to go to Soror Marvetta Coleman to actually start closing us out.
My action step would be to use our voices collectively. We saw something amazing. We witnessed history this month with the installation at the federal level of, an African-American vice president, and just, a dynamic young lady who spoke and brought the house down with her words of spirit and hope for this country. So let's not lose the momentum. Let's use our voices collectively to push lawmakers to change these inequities. As Senator Hughes and other panelists have pointed out, school districts are underfunded by about $4.6 billion. And while it sounds like a lot of the infusion of money is a great win, it is a one-time deal. If we don't continue to consistently invest in education, we will not provide our students with the thorough and efficient education that the Pennsylvania Constitution promises each and every one of them. And there are people who are not listening to us because we are people of color, but that's because we aren't continuing to push the drumbeat collectively on this issue. So the one action step that I have is keep the drumbeat going, join with us, continue to make education a priority for those who are education stakeholders and those who are in power. If we want to see the change, we can't just say it, we've got to do it consistently and get it done.
Thank you. Dr. Morrison?
I'd say be brave and build intergenerational connections. Be brave in speaking up. Turn to whoever you work next to, whoever you go to church with, whoever you're in sorority with, whoever is at your corner store, and start talking about what our children are entitled to, not just what they deserve, but also have children be a part of that work, because it's okay for adults to show up, but we need our children to also understand the importance. Philadelphia has a terrible voter turnout rate. We need to bring our generations up to understand what that political power means and what their political voices mean. And that has to be taught so that we can continue this momentum. It can't just be a one-time movement. It has to be something that's ongoing. Each generation is going to have to fight for the next.
Thank you. Thank you. As we transition to Sora Marvetta Coleman to talk about some advocacy points, and for Dr. Rakhmonda Campbell, Masor, to close out the program, we're going to have our final poll come up. So as the poll is coming, please respond, and we will provide the polling results after Sora Marvetta Coleman speaks. The first question: did you receive any information from the discussion that you believe will help your child better navigate remote learning? And then the second question is: did you learn about any resources that will help your child or a family or another family to support remote learning during the pandemic? So please respond. Sora Coleman, you're next.
Can't vote, Tiffany?
Senator, you voted on the other day.
Nope, you said I can't vote. I'm just checking.
Voted in November.
Okay, yes, I did.
Okay, good job.
Thank you.
Sora Coleman.
All right, I got to let the senator have his say. We gonna sing together, Senator, or what we gonna do? Am I gonna speak, or
I do whatever you tell me to do? I always do whatever the Deltas tell me to do.
That's right.
That's what you say you do anyway. Anyway. Wow, everyone. Just wow. This has just been such a tremendous evening. From the conversations that we've heard tonight, we know that there are many stakeholders that are being impacted: educators, the staff, administrators, advocates, parents. The list goes on, but surely we must all agree that none are more important than those who are sometimes seen as having the least voice. That of our youngest citizens, the students, the children, the ones that we have been talking about tonight. Why? Because they don't make policy. Folks figure because they don't vote. But the reality is, as Dr. Tawanna said, this is intergenerational. There is an opportunity for their voices to be heard, and they should be heard. They don't just need to be the recipients of the decisions that are made for them. The funding inequities that contribute to the significant resource gaps, the breadth of differences of these resources, they shouldn't be based on one zip code. But that, unfortunately, is too often the truth. Black and brown students continue to be the beneficiaries of these misguided funding priorities. We heard Senator Hughes, he was doing mathematics earlier. So giving us basic math. The difference of $10,000 per student, maybe on its own, multiply that by 30. We're talking $300,000 in one classroom. One classroom. We have to recognize the pandemic did not create that which was already a problem. What the pandemic did, however, was to further exacerbate and expose those underlying issues that we are talking about tonight. So the real question we've got to ask ourselves is, who's speaking up? We're talking about we need our children to speak up. We need to speak up. We are the advocates. We cannot wait. The answer is a simple one. However, it's also one that often feels complex. Tomea Sippio Smith spoke about how we sometimes feel uncomfortable approaching elected officials and legislators and others. When the reality is, the challenge is, we just need to tell our stories. I was asked, what's the call to action going to be tonight? In response to that question, generally there's a bill, there's a piece of legislation, there's something that we say, contact your elected officials and tell them we don't want this bill, or tell them that they need to vote. That's not that tonight. Tonight, the call to action is don't wait. Don't wait until there is a bill or legislation. Don't wait until you have 5 more Zoom calls for more information. Don't wait until there is another emergency. The emergency is now. The emergency is what has been and has what is now exposed as being even more so. We need more technology. There's basic needs. We need affordable and consistent internet. We need services to support students in this challenging time. We need teachers to receive training, also known as professional development, that enables them to deliver education in ways for which the degrees that they earned did not prepare them for where we are today. It is not their fault. We are all in this together. Don't wait. Reach out tomorrow. Contact those decision makers, your elected officials, state reps, state senators, congressional legislators, US senators, city council persons, the mayor's office, faith-based leaders, school district boards and leadership. And the senator will correct me, but I believe that the governor will be presenting the state budget in just a couple of weeks.
Tuesday, next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. Don't wait. Share your experiences, your observations, your needs, your concerns. And the other thing is, there are a number of us on this Zoominar who indicated that we don't necessarily have children that are in place in a remote situation. So what? These are our children. So don't wait. Talk about the needs of the children in your household. Talk about the needs in your household. Talk about your nieces, your nephews, your grandchildren. Talk about your friends' children. Talk about the children in our community. This is our village. Don't wait. There are organizations that are championing and calling attention to the needs of Black and Brown children. You heard Tomea speak. PCCY is just one of them. Hopefully the panelists tonight will, they're full of information. One of the panelists made the statement, I think it was Ms. Bright, said, we are resources. Reach out to us. I'm going to ask further that they would provide us with their top 3 recommendations and resources, as well as their own information. And then I'm going to step further out on the limb, because I know the limb is supported by a good trunk of our chapter president, to ask if we would be able to then share that information on our chapter's website, so that there is a housing place for you to go after this evening to see what are some of the resources that are available. And that, I hope that Dr. Nixon will not wrap my knuckles too hard, and she will correct me if I am inappropriate. But I would hope that we would be able to be a resource in that respect. So I say to you in closing, tonight's call to action is simple. It is don't wait. The cost is too high. I now turn this back to Tiffany Wilson.
Soror Coleman, thank you so much. Just want to provide polling results, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Campbell to close us out. Did you receive any information from the discussion you believe will help your child better navigate remote learning? 81% said yes. And the second question, did you learn about any resources that will help your child or family to support remote learning during the pandemic? 96% said yes. Thank you all for your participation, your attention to this this topic, this urgent topic, and I will turn this over to Dr. Campbell to close us out.
El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, reminds us that education is our passport to the future. For the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. Thank you to our co-partnering organization, the Black Clergy and Vicinity Incorporated, our panelists, coordinators, and attendees for engaging in a critically important, candid, insightful, and empowering conversation to help prepare and ensure an equitable education for our youth's future. Poverty should not impact our children's civil right for a free and appropriate public education. Our children are worth the investment. Please continue to check our Philadelphia Alumnae Chapter website for future updates and future virtual events. Please wear your mask, maintain social distancing, check on one another, be safe, and please be intentional about your self-care. Thank you for joining us. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank you, panelists. What an amazing group. Senator, you just are always so on point. Sandra, Dungee, Glenn, I don't know about not being the sharpest pencil in the box. I think you are. Just a call to action, Sora Coleman, we are going to be on it. Excellent idea. And as you were speaking, Dr. Glenn, I did write down resource guide. So Sora Coleman, we were synergized around ensuring that we become a resource and share this work, right? And not just have these conversations, but again, don't wait and what's next. So we will use our website to make sure that we have that information. I do feel like, you know, our next conversation is really around this community-centered support, right? What does that look like? And really bring in some more folks with us. So Dr. Glenn, I love when you said, you know, we have to use, or maybe Senator Hughes said it, how do we use the corner stores, the barbershops? How do we use everything in our community to make sure that we provide the additional support? Because actually, you're right, don't wait, but who are we waiting for? We're waiting for us, right? To really get that work done. So thank you.
Dr. Penny.
Yeah.
So let me just